Our scripture reading today is from the book of Matthew, chapter 9, beginning at verse 9 through 13, and then picking it up at verse 18. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And then verse 18 through 26. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his garment, I would be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, your daughter. Your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went all through the district. This is the word of the Lord. The lectionary combines the first Gospel's account of Matthew's call with the restorations of the woman with the flow of blood and the ruler's daughter. Sandwiched in between the lectionary excerpts, we see Jesus insist that old garments and old wineskins cannot withstand new cloth and new wineskins. It seems like Jesus has not stopped touching people's lives since he finished the Sermon on the Mount. He cleansed a leper, healed the centurion's daughter, healed Peter's mother-in-law, and many others. He pointed out the cost of following when a scribe came to him and asked. Another disciple asked, and the message to each was to leave everything and follow. After this, he calms a storm, delivers 2 men from demons, and heals a paralytic. Jesus is busy, but he is present to those around him. The first person mentioned in our passage today is Matthew. Jesus saw Matthew when he walked by. Tax collectors were the kind of people who became invisible. They were low on the social ladder, and most did not want to be noticed unless they were coming to collect taxes. We don't really know what Matthew left behind, but it was likely his whole livelihood and security. He left it all and followed Jesus. To be seen and called can be a powerful experience of healing. Every day, the Matthews of our lives and world sit by the side, waiting to be seen and called. And sometimes we are the Matthews, waiting to be seen and called. I wonder who the Matthews are in our neighborhoods and what they might need from you or me. How ironic it is that Jesus went to the place where Matthew felt at home, to a house where many tax collectors and sinners were reclining to eat. Everyone had a place at the table. It didn't matter who they were or what they had done, except to the religious authorities. It mattered to them. They interrupted dinner and wanted to know why Jesus would eat with tax collectors and sinners. The religious leaders of Jesus' day lived and taught a life of separation, The requirements for purity required them to avoid anyone who was impure or unclean. This included women, tax collectors, shepherds, undertakers, Gentiles, and eunuchs. But Jesus rejected this view of holiness. He went out of his way to build bridges, where the religious leaders built walls. When the Pharisee posed the question to the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" they underscore their own efforts to separate themselves, the righteous, from the unrighteous. But that's not what Jesus does. He doesn't do that to the dinner guests or to the religious authorities. Jesus deepens and responds to the question posed by the authorities. "I have come," he said, "not to call the righteous, but sinners. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." Do you hear what he is doing? He's equating sinners with patients who are hurting and in need of healing. What if we thought of sin more as a medical condition than a legal issue? What if sin is less about the actions we usually focus on and more about the wounds or the hurts that cause us to act out? What if we could see our own sins and the sins of others in that way? Maybe we would desire, learn, and practice mercy instead of sacrificing others and ourselves. And who among us doesn't need some mercy now and then? The word holy can literally mean set apart. Many religious leaders and thinkers take this to mean that we should be set apart from the world, like the Pharisees thought. Anyone who is a sinner, who goes with unacceptable behaviors like drinking, smoking, swearing, for some, dancing and playing cards. For Jesus, being set apart was not about being set apart from anyone or anything. It was being set apart for something. Jesus chose to live a life that was for people, for relationship, for healing. He was set apart, chosen, and called by God, filled with the Spirit, and empowered by God for the purpose of bringing wholeness to the world. And now, so are we. Before too many moments pass, Jesus has a chance to illustrate what he has spoken about the sick needing a physician. And we know that his meaning goes much further than bodily healing, but his example is powerful. While Jesus was talking to the disciples of John, in the part we did not read today, who had come up to him after the interaction with the Pharisees in the dinner setting, a ruler shows up and says, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand upon her and she will live." Jesus heard and felt the Father's grief, desperation, and faith. He knew it was a hands-on kind of need, and Jesus got up and followed him. In much the same way, Matthew got up and followed Jesus. Jesus leaves the table and goes with the synagogue leader to his house. On the way, a woman suddenly comes up behind him and touches the fringe of his cloak. She had been suffering from a discharge of blood for 12 years. She was an outcast of society because of this, another one of those despised and rejected by the religious leaders. But Jesus turns, sees her, and says, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." Instantly, the woman was made well. She was physically in need of healing, and she also found healing in Jesus' acknowledgement of her existence. He did not hold her at an arm's distance or run from her because of her physical condition. He showed an example of mercy. When Jesus got to the leader's house, everyone there knew the girl was dead. Flute players and a crowd making a commotion had already gathered for a funeral. They knew there was nothing that could be done. They laughed at Jesus when he said, "The girl is not dead, but sleeping." How often have we given up a situation for lost, sure that nothing more could be done? When have we laughed at the possibility of a real and meaningful change? Jesus saw possibility of hope in the midst of despair, light in the midst of darkness, and life in the midst of death. He took the girl by the hand and she got up. By the end of this passage, Jesus has called forth much with his word. A new disciple has been called. 2 daughters have been restored to the fullness of life. Christ's new community has grown to include fishermen and tax collectors, a leader who stands at the center of his community, and a woman who has been pushed to its margins. We might come to the end of this passage and think, well, those are nice stories. We've witnessed a day in the life of Jesus, a call story here, a healing story there, a bunch of people added to the fold. But what do these stories have to do with each other? What are we to make of them? I think the answer to this question lies in a simple transition sentence, a line Matthew seems to insert just to move the plot forward. This sentence seems to hold the key, and Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. This is the moment when Jesus rises from the table where he is dining with tax collectors and sinners and follows the desperate father to his home. This is the moment when Jesus responds to the urgent need before him, to the cry for help that has interrupted the feast. And because Jesus gets up and follows, another urgent need finds him, the woman who is desperate for healing and wholeness. This is the moment when Jesus is confronted with the suffering of the world and chooses to respond with mercy. And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples, verse 19. But this simple transition sentence echoes another transition sentence, and he got up and followed him. That is, Matthew got up and followed Jesus. Matthew, the tax collector, got up from the toll booth and followed Jesus, the one who, with a word, created disciples. And because Matthew got up and followed, he was there when the leader came in and knelt before Jesus, saying, "Come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." Because Matthew got up and followed, he was one of the disciples who went with Jesus to the leader's house. He was one of the disciples who witnessed the hemorrhaging woman reach out and touch Jesus, who witnessed Jesus reach out and take the leader's daughter by the hand. He was one of the disciples who followed Jesus to the places of heartache and daring hope, where, with a word from Jesus, new life might flourish. This is the kind of community Christ is creating when he calls Matthew and all the rest of us, a community that is confronted with the suffering of this world and chooses to respond with mercy. This is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, to follow Jesus to places where hearts are hurting, where hands grasp for hope. Jesus is still creating this community. Jesus claims and commissions new disciples, forming and reforming a church to continue his work. And when we heed Christ's call to follow, we too find ourselves standing between heartache and hope, witnessing the joy of new life. The church of 20, 30, 40 years ago did this kind of outreach together. A project was named, plans were made, leaders appointed, and lives engaged in sharing kingdom mercy. Some churches still function this way. Sometimes we carry out singularly focused projects like this, hosting a special memorial service or concerts, or making space for other congregations or ministries to worship and serve in our spaces. Smaller congregations have a different approach to following Jesus. Folks follow Jesus and follow their passions. Some serve food through Meals on Wheels. Others care for the needs of the people in the community by volunteering at Love Inc. or a similar kind of ministry. Still others provide food for those in emergency situations. Another kind of kingdom ministry involves prayer. As disciples of Jesus, we are still called to follow Christ to places of heartache and elusive hope. We are still called to respond with mercy when we're confronted with suffering, and in doing so, we might discover that Jesus is still forming a new community, a community of sinners and saints, of those who find themselves at the center and those relegated to the margins, a kingdom knit of those who have come to Jesus in search of mercy and those whom Christ's mercy has found. Jesus still calls. And so we get up and follow him to places where hearts find healing and hope blossoms into new life. Amen.